Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. The Bible tells one big story of redemption, and we want to spend 5 minutes every day journeying through the Bible from start to finish and exploring how all of it points to Jesus.
Hey everyone, welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Alexa, and today we continue our study of the book of Psalms by looking at Psalms 121 to 125. Psalms 121 through 125 continue the Song of Ascents that we saw in Psalm 120. In Psalm 121, the psalmist speaks to the deliverance of the Lord. He writes how he lifts his eyes to look for help and is met by the help of the Lord. The psalmist describes how God helps his people by keeping their steps steady and protects his people from their coming and going. In Psalm 122, David's song is a prayer about Jerusalem. David prays for the well-being of Jerusalem and asks that it will be a city of peace. He prays that the people of Israel will experience peace and remain dedicated to worship to God. In Psalm 123, the psalmist writes how he lifts his eyes to the Lord as he waits for God's favor. The psalmist has experienced contempt and scorn from the wicked, and his eyes are fixed on the Lord as he waits for God's deliverance. In Psalm 124, David writes how God brings victory. He writes how if God has not been on their side, they would have been defeated, but because of God's help, they escaped death. In Psalm 125, the psalmist writes how Israel is stable and secure because of the Lord. He writes how the Lord's powerful presence guards his people and keeps them from being shaken. The psalmist trusts that God will guard the righteous and will give his people justice from all wrongdoing. Psalms 121 through 125 continually speak to how our help comes from the Lord. These psalmists recognize that only God can truly help them, so they rely on him for deliverance and victory. In times of trouble, where does our gaze go? Do we look to the Lord for help, or do we look for other people or things to help us? These psalms remind us how the greatest help we could ever receive comes from God. He is the only one who can truly save us, protect us, and provide for us. When we receive material blessing, it's because God provided the money. When we remain sheltered inside from a storm, it's because God provided the roof above our heads. When we feel peace in moments of fear, it's because God provided his perfect peace. God helps us in every area of our lives. Because God is our great helper, he is the one who we are to look to when we need provision and protection. So when you find yourself in need or in trouble, lift your eyes to the Lord. Set your gaze on him and be reminded how he helps you in your time of need. Focusing on the Lord keeps our hearts trusting in him. If our eyes are cast down at our troubles, we will be overcome with fear. But when we look to God, we are reminded of his great strength that is bigger than anything we are currently facing. Our salvation through Christ also reminds us how God is our helper. In his grace, God sent his Son to be our deliverer. And because of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, those who trust in him escape death. Without Christ's grace, we would have been helpless in our fight against sin and would have received the punishment for our sin. But the grace of Christ and forgiveness God has given to us saves us from death, and we now walk in freedom and victory. As followers of Christ, we know the answer to the question, where does my help come from? Our help comes from our great God who delights to save in his people. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hey, if you enjoyed today's episode and are excited to come back tomorrow, will you just take a second to leave us a rating or review on iTunes? This helps more people find our show. We would so appreciate your review. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to talking with you again tomorrow.